Hi, my name's Teresa McKinnon. I work at the Language Centre at the University of Warwick, and the aim of this presentation is to give you an overview of some work that we've been doing at the Language Centre around using computer-mediated communication to support language learning. And that work has spanned a period of around 6 years now, with successive projects, each one changing just slightly the focus of exactly what we're doing. And we've arrived at a point really where we feel that, or we hope that we can offer some practical advice from the journey that we've been on. Just to give you a little bit of context, the Language Centre generally deals with a wide range of undergraduate and postgraduate students, all wanting to add language learning to part of the portfolio of skills that they collect during their period at Warwick. So they're often specialists in other areas, engineering, maths. They may not have done any language study for some considerable time, perhaps from their early days at school. They are an international mix of students, so they come from all over the world. And we have a very vibrant centre with a group of staff who are particularly interested in how they can use ICT for teaching and learning, how they can make good use of technology. More recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, changes in how we assess our language acquisition, language skills for students have altered slightly to increase the importance of oral and oral skills, moving to oral skills presenting 15% of the summative total for the end of a module, and oral skills 20%. So a significant amount of the summative assessment is based on people's ability to listen and speak. This is unsurprising, I think, to most people, and clearly it is valuable, but it also presents challenges, particularly within the constraints that we have of maybe 2 hours or 3 hours maximum contact time a week. In the very early days of this project, I was taking part in an e-learning award at Warwick, and then moved on as well to a master's in post-compulsory education. And my focus here was as an educator, language educator, for quite some time, for some, nearly 28 years now, was why should we not make it easier to actually engage our very IT savvy students in communication through technology? And the reading that I did around that generated an awful lot of reasons why it would be difficult. Clearly, we all as teachers adopted different approaches, and across really a wide spectrum of views that Wright very clearly identified a continuum between transmission and interpretation approaches to language acquisition and how we believe people acquire a language. So our role, therefore, is perceived slightly differently according to where we are on that spectrum. How much we correct people when they are learning to speak a language is also affected by our approach. So there are very significant pedagogical discussions around how we use tools for listening and speaking. There are also some other significant themes that we knew we would have to look out for. We know there are effective barriers in the adoption of technology. We know that actually it's very important to lower those barriers to increase engagement in technology for learning and teaching, particularly amongst tutors. So we sort of expected that. We expected that technical management and support would be an important part. However, what was also clear from the reading, and this was reading across a spectrum, quite a wide spectrum of sources, was that there are affective factors also involved, emotional reasons why people find it very difficult to record themselves using emergent language skills. So a sort of double hit was emerging. And really over the last 6 years we've been we've had lots and lots of examples of just how complicated and complex an issue this is. So this is really about sort of hopefully passing on some of the lessons that we've learned that may help save others time. Around halfway through the research and the work that we've been doing, despite the fact that we were very clear that the barriers were not unsurmountable but were significant, we, as a small group of people using these process tools, voice tools in language teaching, had become a sort of community of practice, all adopting the tools according to how they best fit our approach, so using them in different ways. But we found that they were very conducive to having discussions and encouraging us to be reflective practitioners. And all of these things are very valuable professionally. It also made us return to research and made us look at the sorts of things that were out there, things such as Julie Salmon and Laura Lard, and there are lots of very interesting conclusions coming out of the sort of early e-learning research that were supportive and that were helpful to us. So this was about reaching beyond perhaps where we would normally look, which would be restricted to modern foreign language research and CAL research, computer-assisted learning research. The other thing that sort of kept us going was the fact that the comments that we were getting back from students at the end of years were actually overwhelmingly positive. I'm not saying that everybody was delighted about having to do some speaking practice at home, but those students who were engaged kept coming back and really appreciated the sorts of things, the sorts of opportunities that they were getting. They were particularly concerned about the ephemeral nature of language learning. And I think that's understandable. If you're learning Japanese and you only listen to it for 2 hours a week, it's quite helpful to be able to recap and return to it. In fact, the students were coming back to us in the feedback and saying, why don't you use it like this? So again, this was a very useful professional tool and dialogue to have. In January of 2011, the three of us presented some of our findings to the Association of University Language Centres conference here at Warwick. One of the things that we had agreed on was finding which of the suite of tools that we had available to us, these were tools that we had arrived at after a process of elimination and testing, and they're tools provided by a company called Wimber. Which of those tools was right for the sort of collaboration and communication that we wanted to foster? And identifying that was a process in itself, but it was helpful to have done that. We then really were looking at just how, as we continue to move forward, usage of the tools was increasing. And what we were starting to find was that a core of tutors had now embedded the use of voice in their teaching, and the three of us were clearly part of that core. But once they were embedded, we were seeing increasing engagement in usage. And that engagement, as we can see here from the quantitative data, in terms of the numbers of messages generated and the amount of communication happening outside the classroom, listening, speaking, was significant. The blue line at the top there, the use of voice boards themselves are basically a spoken version of a threaded online board. They fit very well a wide range of approaches. So it's quite understandable, therefore, that a wide range of different types of teachers with different approaches to language learning can locate them within their practice. And what we were finding as well was not only was the number of messages increasing, but actually the amount of lurking, the amount of quiet listening in the background. And this is a well um, documented phenomenon in online resource. People were listening to these things, whether they wanted to reply to them or not, whether that was too challenging, that was up to them. So all good things, because actually we really do want our students to engage with listening to the language as much as possible, particularly when the language recorded is pertinent to the things that they're doing. This is just an update, a fairly recent update of the number of resources and the number of messages going through the boards. And you can see there's roughly 10 times as many messages for each resource. In many of these resources, you only need to create one in order to facilitate lots and lots of interaction. So voice email, for example, you create one tool, and that can be used multiple times just by changing the email address that you're putting in. So what we started to feel was that we were able to, by analysing and discussing the work that we'd each done with separate groups in different languages with different groups of students, we could start to locate the key points that people need to understand if they're going to be able to support students through what is a fairly complex area of increasing opportunities for speaking and listening through online environments. It's very, very important to spend a lot of time thinking and analysing the type of communication. Who is going to engage in this communication, and why should they? What role are they going to have? How much control are they going to have? Now, in the paper that I've submitted, there is far more detail that I'm going to include in this presentation. But hopefully you'll take a few minutes, and it's presented in grid form, and it'll take you through the key questions that tutors need to ask themselves in order to be able to work out whether this sort of process tools approach to including listening and speaking is going to suit them and is going to fit with their teaching approach. It's very important that both the students and the tutor themselves find relative advantage in use of this approach. And clearly the relative advantage that we're looking for is that our students are learning and engaging more, not that they're being put off. So the level of challenge and the consideration of affective factors is actually very, very important. We also need to supply, and this has taken the form very largely of snatch conversations in the corridor or at the water cooler, but we need to give opportunities for tutors to discuss what they're doing and how they're doing it, and to share best practice, share ideas. And to formalise that in some way, we've got a WIMBA users forum and an area within our intranet to help support that. And because the discussions that we're having go actually to the very heart of our theoretical perspective on what we do, then we also need support for that, because those conversations may actually change what we do. I personally have adopted a Steiner-Vale's traveller metaphor as I've gone through this journey over the last 6 years, listening to people, trying to find out more about how they feel about this experience and the sorts of thought processes they've gone through. And that has helped me to change the way I see what I do. And I suspect as well it has changed the way those tutors also view what they do. So a very challenging journey to go on, but actually also a very important one. It's also important that we make sure that we remain attached to the student and take their feedback from the experience, and perhaps modify our interventions on the basis of what they say. So looking at the success criteria, the things that we found were absolutely key to making things work. Where these things were in place, then we saw essentially some exciting work going on. When there was a fit between the tool and the need, the tool needs to be reliable. Now, we have seen a big increase in the usage once we've integrated our tools actually within a Moodle environment. And I think the reason for that is largely to do with the fact that once people are within their VLE, if they can very quickly add a resource and they've got on a drop-down list, add a voice email, add a voice board, it's much, much easier to do than operate through two separate systems and then link or embed. So removing some of those technical barriers, making things as easy as possible, those sorts of things actually make success much more likely. I'm talking about success here in terms of the amount of adoption and rollout of these sorts of tools, really. Because there's a good deal of thought and time goes into preparing these sorts of interventions, then they need to be sustainable for the tutor. It's very important that I, as a tutor, having spent a good deal of time thinking about which tool and how I'm doing it, and then recording it, I can perhaps reuse that idea and repurpose it, take it out of one voice board and perhaps put it into a different forum. And the tools that we have give us all of that flexibility. So we can export an individual thread, we can export sets of threads, and conversations, we can analyze and research around them if necessary. And establishing usefulness for the learner, again, is addressing that, why should I bother? And I think a lot of that is about moving the locus of control. Students don't necessarily ask, why should I bother, if they understand how it contributes. And once a good intervention is in place, they're very quick to seize that, and that amount of interaction gives you direct feedback as to whether you've got it right. One very imaginative and creative idea that came out of our Japanese team from Katsuku was giving students a short piece of reading part of a story to record, which they recorded independently. None of them had seen each other's recordings, which she then threaded together to create a story for them to listen to. And it's a sort of jigsaw approach, and I think it's a fascinating one and worked very well, was very well received. So we've given some ideas, again, in the paper of the sorts of activities that worked well. And as we continue this journey, I hope we'll continue to define those things. So finally, I'm going to leave the last word for the students. Now, this is feedback from this year's cohort of students just finishing this month. Overwhelmingly positive. There are those that express concerns about being judged by others because they're recording themselves. And those sorts of things, I think, do need tutor support. But overwhelmingly, people got it. Even if they were just listening, they understood that this was giving them additional external input that was helping them to arrive at a better understanding of the language and a greater ability to speak accurately and communicate well in the language. So we will continue on this journey, and we hope that the messages and the thoughts that are very practical that we've included in the paper for you will help others to avoid some of the pitfalls and cope with some of the barriers that are no doubt presented, and improve the nature of teaching in very restricted circumstances, as we often are, with very limited exposure or face-to-face time with students.